All right, welcome you. You've joined us today for a deep dive. We're diving deep into thinking like a monk.
Cool.
We're going to be exploring the ideas in Jay Shetty's book. We've got some key excerpts to guide us. Now, the idea today isn't, we're not trying to get you to shave your head and go join a monastery.
Right, not at all.
But rather to really extract some of those really powerful and actionable insights from that monk mindset and see how we can apply it to our daily lives to bring more clarity, to bring more peace, and a real sense of purpose.
That's right. We're looking for those ways to translate really ancient wisdom into practical tools that you can use right now. I think that Shetty's own journey is really interesting, by the way. He went from this world of finance into monastic life and back. And I think that gives us a really unique perspective on these principles.
Yeah, let's jump right into that initial spark for Shetty. He talks about being completely captivated by he even uses the word fell in love with the idea of a monk's life after hearing one speak about selfless sacrifice. And there's this quote that really hit him, and honestly, it resonates deeply with me. I'll share it with you. He said, "Plant trees under whose shade we did not plan to sit."
Wow.
That's powerful imagery.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That really captures the essence, right, of this selfless outlook, a focus that goes beyond your own immediate personal gain, and really hints at what Shetty describes as that core of the monk way, which is it's a journey. It's this journey of going inward and self-examination, getting to the root of your motivations, your desires, to really discover this peace, this calm. This sense of purpose that isn't dependent on, what's happening around you.
Yeah. It's so interesting because he breaks it down into 3 stages. He says, first, it's about letting go. Second, it's about growth. And then third, it's about giving.
Yeah.
It sounds like a very deliberate path.
Yeah. And it really is. And this structure, I think, is so helpful because it provides this roadmap, this sort of like roadmap for personal transformation. The letting go is all about this decluttering, both in your external environment, but also in your internal landscape, right? Growing is about nurturing those positive habits and intentions. And then giving is about extending that positive energy outwards through, service and gratitude.
So let's delve into that first stage then. Let's talk about letting go.
Yeah.
He shares this metaphor from Kuranga Das about a dusty mirror in a storeroom. And he says this mirror, it represents our identity. And it gets covered by all the dust of external influences. And that dust, it obscures who we are, our true selves. It obscures our real values.
It's interesting, right, how this idea resonates so much with ancient wisdom. Because Shetty brings in the term Sintodharpardamzanam, and what that means is the clearance of the impure mirror of the mind. It's a concept that comes from the teachings of Chaitanya. It really underscores this idea that's been present across so many spiritual traditions, that our perception of reality it's often clouded by these impurities, these distractions.
And those distractions are what monastic traditions really emphasize removing. Things like excessive talking, sex, worldly possessions. Now, he's not saying you got to suddenly give all those up.
No.
But the goal is for you to become more aware of, to filter out the external noise that's constantly bombarding you, that doesn't truly align with who you are.
Yeah. It's about recognizing what influences are actively shaping you, right? Your thoughts, your feelings, your actions. Where do our values originate? Like, where do they come from? Shetty points out that values, they don't just magically appear.
Right.
They're defined by your experiences and often heavily shaped by your parents, by your caregivers.
Right.
Even if, you find yourself maybe consciously or unconsciously kind of pushing against those influences later in life.
Yeah. And I love this. There's this try this exercise that he includes in the book that I thought was really, really insightful. It's about you actually writing down some of your core values that you think guide your life and then trying to trace them back to where they originated. Like, where did this come from? He even provides an example table with things like, kindness and tracing it back to his parents and that feeling genuinely true to him versus, appearance being linked to maybe media influence but not feeling quite the same way internally, or wealth coming from a parent's expectations but not personally resonating, and things like good grades being emphasized by school even if they sometimes interfered with real learning.
That makes you think, right?
It really does.
About the foundation. Like, what is at the base of your belief system? Are you truly living by values that are inherently yours? Or are you maybe echoing, influences from your past or from the broader culture.
Yeah.
And that check mark that he includes in this example table, where you're literally checking whether or not that value resonates. I think that's key.
It is.
It's a key to the whole process of self-discovery.
So to really paint a picture of this idea of material letting go, he describes, the ashram environment.
Right. Yeah.
Simple robes, shaved heads, no mirrors, very, very basic diet, very limited access to news and media.
Right.
It's pretty extreme, but you can certainly see how it would force a significant shift in focus, inward.
Yeah. I mean, the ashram, you have to think of it as this really controlled environment.
Yeah.
Right. That's designed to minimize those external stimuli.
Yeah.
So you're removing those common distractions. And what this does is it gives you a dedicated space to really turn inward and confront, the deeper aspects of yourself without that constant bombardment of sensory input
Right.
that we're all used to in our everyday lives.
And so, this idea of identifying your values, it naturally leads into this idea of aligning how you spend your time and your money with what you say you value. And he actually suggests you track it.
Track it.
Actually look at, how much time do you dedicate to the things that you claim are important to you? Family, friends, your own health, your own well-being.
Yeah.
And are you walking the walk?
Yeah, I mean, what's really, really fascinating about this is that, your bank statements and your daily schedules often tell a very different story than the values that you might consciously profess.
Right.
And so that discrepancy can be really revealing if you really look at it.
Yeah, he uses this social media post comparison that I thought was pretty relatable. It's like, are you spending your time watching a TV show, or are you having lunch with your family?
Right.
Are you investing in that daily coffee habit, or are you investing in healthier food options for yourself?
Yes.
Are you mindlessly scrolling through social media, or are you dedicating that time to meditation?
Good question.
It really shines a light on how those spending habits, both time and money, they really act as this direct and honest reflection of what you truly prioritize in your life. And he also makes this distinction between short-term and long-term investments, of your resources. Are you seeking immediate gratification, through entertainment? Or are you consciously making choices that contribute to your long-term growth? Your overall well-being, what he refers to as enlightenment in a broader sense.
In a more accessible sense.
Now, inevitably, as you start to look more deeply inward, you're going to encounter negativity.
Absolutely.
Right. He talks about these lower values, things like greed, lust, anger, ego, illusion, and envy. And how surprisingly easily they can take hold.
Yes.
If you give them even just a little bit of room,
they can really dominate, can't they?
Yeah.
Your thoughts and your actions, if you're not careful.
But he offers a more positive perspective too. He reminds you that there are always more pathways to feel uplifted than dragged down.
Right.
Right. And he brings in this idea that actively letting go of false values, it creates this essential space within you. Much like nature has its own cycles of, shedding, leaves in the fall.
Yeah. Animals shedding skin.
Yeah. Right. It's like we need that to make room for the new.
That's a powerful analogy. I love that. Because it illustrates really this necessity of release.
Yeah.
And renewal in any healthy system.
Right.
Clinging to negativity or outdated beliefs. It's like, that tree clinging to its dead leaves.
Yeah.
It prevents you from embracing new growth and from seeing those new possibilities.
Absolutely. And he also touches on how negativity can be quite contagious.
Right.
Yes,
it's true.
And that this is often driven by our very human desire to fit in, to conform.
Yeah.
He mentions that research showing that people will actually align themselves with a group's incorrect answer even when they personally know it's wrong.
Yeah.
That's pretty eye-opening.
It really is. It really is. And it highlights this very, very subtle but incredibly powerful influence that your social environment can have on your thoughts and your behaviors.
Yeah.
You may even find yourself unconsciously adopting the negativity around you.
Right. Just to fit in.
Just to fit in.
Or avoid a conflict.
Exactly.
So the monk teachers, they they had this piece of advice. They said, try for just 1 week to consciously refrain from complaining, comparing yourself to others,
Right.
or criticizing, and keep a tally of how often you catch yourself doing it,
Oh, wow.
just to bring that awareness.
Well, awareness is always the first step.
Yeah.
It's the first step towards any kind of meaningful change.
Yeah.
And by tracking these negative tendencies, in your own mind, in your own speech, you can begin to understand really how often they're happening. You can identify what triggers them,
Right.
and then that allows you to start making more intentional choices about how you communicate and what you really want to focus on.
And it's not just about the content of what you say, but the manner in which you say it, you know? He really emphasizes the importance of mindful communication. Choosing your words very carefully. Yeah. Choosing your words with purpose.
Yes.
And he contrasts,
Yeah.
simply complaining to a friend.
Right.
Versus engaging in direct and thoughtful communication with the person involved.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Right. He uses the practical example of, a partner who consistently comes home late.
Right.
Instead of complaining, you actually talk.
Exactly.
You communicate.
Yeah. And that discussion, I think, is crucial. Complaining, oftentimes, it's just a way to vent your frustration.
Right.
Without actually leading to any real resolution.
Right.
But mindful communication.
Yeah.
Mindful communication is about expressing your needs,
Yeah.
your feelings, in a way that fosters understanding.
Right.
And that encourages positive change in a situation.
Yeah. Then we move into the topic of forgiveness.
Yes.
And he talks about conditional forgiveness.
Oh, yeah.
That sort of, if you apologize in just the right way, then maybe I'll forgive you.
Right.
But he really advocates for what he calls transformational forgiveness.
Yes.
Where you're forgiving without needing or expecting anything in return.
Without needing anything in return.
From the other person.
And that's really about you.
Yeah.
You releasing yourself from that burden.
Yeah.
From the resentment.
Right.
From the anger that you might be carrying.
Yeah.
And it's a really powerful act of self-liberation.
Yeah.
That isn't contingent on the other person's actions.
All right.
Or apologies.
Yeah.
Or even their remorse.
And there's another try this exercise here, which is actively practicing asking for and receiving forgiveness. It involves taking the step to visualize yourself in the other person's shoes, to gain a new perspective. And then he says, write a detailed forgiveness letter where you actually list, the specific wrongs that you feel were committed.
Yeah.
But also acknowledging any shortcomings on your own part.
Okay.
And then actually recording yourself reading this letter and listening back to it. I thought that was really powerful.
The visualization, I think, is key.
Yeah.
It really helps to cultivate, empathy and that deeper level of understanding for the other person's perspective.
Right.
By trying to see the situation through their eyes.
Right.
You can really begin to break down those emotional barriers.
Yeah.
That might be preventing you from truly giving forgiveness.
Yeah. Finally, in this idea of dealing with negativity, he introduces this method, this spot, stop, and swap method.
Okay.
Which is first become aware of the negative thought or the impulse as it arises.
Okay.
Then intentionally choose to stop that thought in its tracks. And then consciously swap it out for a more positive or constructive thought or behavior.
So you're actively replacing it with something else.
Yeah. It's a process.
It is. It's a process. It's a 3-step process that you can use to kind of interrupt those ingrained negative patterns.
Right.
And you can cultivate more positive ones in their place. And it does require, I think, consistent awareness and a lot of effort.
Right.
But it gives you that framework. It gives you that framework to follow.
Right.
To start making real changes.
Okay, let's move on to the topic of fear. Buddha has this quote that I think really sets the stage here. He says, "Fear does not prevent death. It prevents life."
Wow.
That's a statement, that really makes you pause. And then he uses that classic example of Arjuna in the Mahabharata.
Oh, yeah.
Literally dropping his bow due to overwhelming fear right before this epic pivotal battle.
It shows you how paralyzing fear can be.
It does.
Right.
Yeah.
Even for individuals who are, incredibly capable.
Hmm.
and skilled, it really shows you that internal conflict
Right.
that arises when fear just takes over your mind and body.
So Shetty shares his personal experience with using meditation to dig down and uncover the root of his own fears.
Okay.
And he recounts the story of tracing his exam anxiety
Uh-huh.
all the way back to a fundamental fear of disappointing his parents.
Wow.
And he describes it as this full body aha moment.
Really?
Yeah, and it sounds, it's like you can just feel it, this cathartic,
Yes.
this transformative experience that he had.
And I think that anecdote, it really shows you the power of introspection,
Right.
of looking inward, and how those fears that you might have, those seemingly unrelated,
Right.
Disparate fears, they can often be traced back to a single
Right.
core underlying concern.
Yeah. Yeah.
Bringing that fear into your conscious awareness,
Yeah.
I think that's a crucial step in overcoming it.
Yeah. He uses this analogy of the trees in biosphere too, needing the stress of wind to grow stronger bark
Wow.
and develop, deeper, more resilient root systems.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To explain how the challenges, the very things that we fear and often try to avoid,
Right.
play this vital role.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like they're a catalyst
Yeah.
for growth
Right.
and resilience.
Right.
Yeah. Without that pressure, we remain fragile
Uh-huh.
and less equipped to handle those future difficulties.
Yeah. I mean, then you've got Alex Honnold, who, his approach to fear in the context of free solo climbing is mind-boggling,
Right.
He doesn't try to suppress it. He just expands his comfort zone,
Okay.
through rigorous practice
Yeah.
until the
Yeah.
becomes not scary anymore.
Right. Honnold's approach, it's pretty extreme,
Yeah.
but it highlights something for us, and that's that you can fundamentally change your relationship with fear.
Yeah.
Right. And you do this through preparation, through practice, through gradual exposure
Right.
to those things that trigger anxiety for you.
Yeah.
It's about pushing those boundaries
Yeah.
until what was once terrifying starts to feel more manageable.
Yeah. He also shares a story about this successful attorney who, had this desire to change careers.
Right.
But his root fear was actually the fear of failure, the fear of being seen as less capable.
Yeah.
And then the takeaway there, he says, was the importance of developing this intimacy with your fear by walking into it.
By walking into it.
Rather than constantly trying to avoid it.
Wow.
That's powerful.
It's so important, that idea, right, of confronting your fears
Jay.
directly rather than avoiding them. By understanding, like, what are you afraid of losing?
Right.
What are you afraid of experiencing? When you ask those questions,
Yeah.
when you know the specific nature of your fear,
Yeah.
then you can start to dismantle it.
He goes on to explain how taking the time to really track your fears
Yeah.
back to their source,
Right.
it often reveals those underlying attachments, maybe to your self-image, to your possessions, to specific relationships,
Right.
And he draws this contrast between what he calls the monkey mind,
Okay.
which constantly clings to these temporary things, and the monk mind,
Right.
which actively practices the principle of detachment.
Detachment. Yeah. And that's really central to this whole thing, right? Detachment, recognizing that everything is impermanent.
Yeah.
That helps you to kind of lessen your grip
Yeah.
on things.
Yeah.
And by doing that, you reduce your fear of losing them.
He gives this example of a friend losing his job and immediately panicking and questioning every past decision.
Right. It's like that short-term fear.
Yeah.
Right. It can be so overwhelming in the moment.
Absolutely. And he introduces this idea of seeing the whole story
Okay.
by reflecting on past challenges.
Yes.
That you've successfully navigated, and that ultimately led to your present successes.
Right.
And he really encourages practicing gratitude for those tough times because it fostered growth.
Yes. Reframing those past difficulties is such a powerful tool for building resilience in the present.
It is.
Right. When you recognize that good
Yeah.
that came out of those previous challenges, it gives you hope, it gives you trust
Yeah.
that you can get through what you're going through now.
Absolutely. And he firmly states that denying the fear only makes the underlying problems bigger.
Right.
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 She references that lesson in the Gita where Arjuna has to confront his fear to gain this crucial insight.
Right.
And he brings up this Chuck Palahniuk quote. He says, "Find what you're afraid of most and go live there."
Oh, wow. Yeah. That's a challenge.
It is.
It's a call to be honest with yourself.
Yeah.
You know, when you avoid those fears,
Right.
they just grow in the shadows.
Yeah.
But when you confront them directly, you create that path to understand them,
Yeah.
to resolve them,
Right.
and to grow.
Yeah, and he reiterates that this process of acknowledging your fears, of observing them without judgment,
Right.
of addressing the root causes,
Mhm.
and amending your patterns of reaction, it can reclassify that fear.
Right.
So instead of it being this negative, overwhelming monster, it can become just a neutral signal, or even an opportunity.
An opportunity. Yeah.
I-
And by changing your perception of it,
Yeah.
your relationship with fear, you can turn it from a barrier into a guide, you know.
Yeah.
That provides you with insights into those areas where you might need to learn or to grow or make some changes.
Okay, let's move on to intention. This quote from the Rig Veda, I think, really sets the stage beautifully. When there is harmony between the mind, heart, and resolution, then nothing is impossible.
Wow.
It's pretty powerful.
It is. And it speaks to that potential. When you reach a state of deep alignment, you know, within yourself,
Right.
when your thoughts, your feelings, and your resolve are all moving towards a meaningful purpose, that's when the magic happens.
And he makes this point that even once you've managed to quiet some of the external noise,
Right.
it's still absolutely essential to examine your own goals and aspirations
Absolutely.
and understand the motivations. He contrasts fear as a motivator, which he says is unsustainable in the long run,
Right.
with desire, which is often centered around personal gratification. You
Right,
know,
yeah.
these very material goals that we often chase after.
Yeah. And while desire can be a very powerful force, you know, that
Yeah.
initial force behind what you do, Shetty cautions against relying on it,
Yeah.
you know, solely as this foundation
Right.
for lasting fulfillment.
Right.
He points out that those material goals, they don't always deliver,
Right.
you know, the happiness that we think they will.
Yeah, because true happiness and genuine fulfillment, he says, come from mastering your own mind
Yes.
and connecting with something deeper within yourself, rather than the accumulation of external success. And he even brings up this research, this Princeton University research,
Oh, yeah.
that indicates that the impact of income on overall happiness is levels off,
It goes.
around $75,000 a year.
That's right.
And a middle-class American can be just as satisfied as someone like Jeff Bezos.
It's interesting, isn't it?
It is. It really is.
You know, it really highlights that idea of the diminishing returns
Yeah.
of material wealth.
Yeah.
You know, once your needs are met, then those other factors,
Yeah.
you know, social connections, purpose, inner peace, those things become much more important.
Right. And popular culture, he contends.
Yeah.
It often places this disproportionate emphasis on external success, you know,
It does.
over community,
Right.
over self-acceptance.
Yeah.
And he links this imbalance to the trend of declining happiness rates in many societies,
Right.
despite rising incomes. And he references Jeffrey Sachs, who's made the point about the weakening of social networks
Yes.
and a general decline in societal trust.
It really makes you think about what truly matters, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah.
It does. And he points out that your intentions,
Yeah.
they can actually be linked to all sorts of different motivations. You know, he says, you know, engaging in service could be driven by desire for recognition,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
While supporting your family might be rooted in love.
Absolutely.
And the pursuit of wealth could be intended to enable greater service.
Yeah.
It's all about making those choices consciously and intentionally and understanding your why.
Your why, yeah.
Yeah.
Understanding the motivations behind your actions.
Right.
And that's essential
Yeah.
for making choices that align with your values.
And he really emphasizes being honest with yourself
Yes.
about your intentions. And he says, follow the whys.
Oh, I like that.
You
yeah.
know, like dig deeper.
Yeah.
What's underneath this?
Yeah, it's like you're digging deeper into your motivations, and sometimes when you do that, you know, you might uncover these hidden desires, these unmet emotional needs
Right.
that you weren't even aware of.
Yeah.
And then once you understand those,
Right.
you can start to address them
Yeah.
in a more direct way.
Yeah. And he introduces this try this, add to bees to your to-dos exercise.
Okay.
It's a really neat idea. Instead of just making a list of tasks, he says also list the qualities. The qualities you need to be to achieve those goals.
Oh.
So, if your goal is financial freedom, you might realize, okay, well, I need to be disciplined.
Right.
I need to be focused. Or if you're wanting to have a more fulfilling relationship, you need to be calm, you need to be understanding.
Yeah. I